So good morning, everyone. Good afternoon in Vietnam. We are very pleased to have the last session of this second sequence of Agence Vietnam webinar. This sequence was on the updated national impacts and adaptation of climate change for Vietnam. And today we will discuss about households, individuals, and firms' impacts of climate change. So for this very important session, we welcome Dr. Nguyen Truong Toan and Dr. Thi Thu Hoai. They will both present their results, which come from, again, this COP26 Special Assessment Report. It's you can find the key results in chapter 6. And we also have the pleasure to welcome Phan Nguyen, who is the co-author of this chapter from Université Libre de Bruxelles, and Phan Can Van from University of West England, and Do Xuan Hong from Nong Lam University. So Tuan, I will give you the floor to introduce the discussants as well, and lead the webinar basically. So Tuan, the floor is yours.
Great. Can I share my screen? You see my screen, my slide?
Yes.
Everyone, I'm very happy to have an opportunity to present our work about the impacts of climate variability on the Vietnamese labor market. Before coming into the presentation, I'd like to express my my thanks to AFD and IRD for the funding and for the initiating, coordinating the GMS Vietnam projects. So our team that was in charge of the chapter 6 about the labor market impacts of climate change consists of 7 members. Dr. Thi Thu Hoai from Central Institute of Economics Management, Dr. Do Xuan Hong from Nong Lam University, Ms. Diễm Hoàng from University of Duisburg, Essen, and myself from Australian National University, Ms. Phạm Minh Thu from Institute of Labour and Social Affairs, and Mr. Phan Duy Anh from University of Libre de Brussels, and Dr. Phan Khánh Văn from University of West England. And we have 2 experts who play the roles of reviewers, that Associate Professor Giang Thanh Long, who is expert in social economics research, and Dr. Hồ Công Hòa from Central of Institute Economics Management. In this chapter, the main purpose of this chapter is to examine the impacts of climate variability on 2 sides of the labor markets, so that we will have a comprehensive views about what the impacts of climate change on individuals and households and firms in Vietnam. To achieve that purpose, we use the large-scale survey data and administrative data on households, on labor force, on firms, and we apply econometric techniques to quantitatively measure the impacts. So people they take object, they can adapt, and we in this chapter we investigate the adaptation of the household and individuals and their perception to climate variability, and we also provide some projections for the loss by the end of the century in 4 popular scenarios, and we have some policy implications. As a presentation, Mr. Duy will present the effects on household, while Khánh Văn will cover from labor supply, firms, perception and adaptation. And Dr. Xuân Hồng will provide some projections, and Dr. Thi Thu Hoai will cover the policy implication from the report. So now I will give the floor to Mr. Phan Duy Anh to present about the findings on the effects of climate variability on household.
Okay. So now I will share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see.
Okay, so now I will present my my research. This session will investigate the effect of climate change on household income. And to doing this, I will allow a nonlinearity of the impact, and I will try to assess how household revenue will be reacted with the weather variation and extreme temperature. This research is quite interesting because in Vietnam, most of the population still working in the agriculture sector, and most of the income of the poor come from the agriculture. As we all know that it is very sensitive with the climate variability, and our result is very important because it's a crucial step in designing an efficient mitigation policy by point that what type of the population that we should be targeted for the adaptation program. So to doing this, I will combine the Vietnam Household Living Standard Survey (VHLSS) in 16 years with the 9 weeks of the survey, and combine with climate data, include temperature and precipitation data. And in each survey, approximately 9,400 households were collected, and at least half of the households were kept in the study, and the other half of that we cannot check. And this data have a limitation that they will break between 2008 and 2010 census, because in 2010 the sample survey was totally renewed, and therefore we cannot check the person who joined 2008 and joined at the same time joined in 2010. And our research will focus on the agricultural income, which include income from crop and non-crop income. The crop income include, so for example, rice, food, industrial crop, or other food crop. And non-crop income will include the forestry, aquaculture, livestock income. So the research about the relation between income and weather variability is not new. There are many research have to do with it. First, we can talk about the Dell in 2009, which based on the correlation that hot country tend to be poor. They estimate that one additional census degree will be associated with 8% lower average income per capita. And then Asemoglu concludes that they point that the local weather influence to mortality rate, and then they have an adverse impact on economic development. And finally, Afuma in 2013 using panel data to eliminate the country-specific and observable characteristic, which allow estimating the impact of temperature on income causally. And for Vietnam, there also few research on this topic. First is the Nalot in 2016. He found that increase in temperature by 1 degree will be decrease the total income by 20%. And the last research is in 2018. They found that while higher dry temperature is increase net revenue, higher temperature in wet season will increase revenue. However, literature reviews have some methodological issues. First is a nonlinearity impact of climate variable on income. It is because of that, the impact on high temperature will be very different from the impact of the low temperature. So to account for this issue, we will build a temperature bin to account for the issues. And the second issue is the heterogeneity of weather impact. Really, because of that, the impact from climate change will be very different from between the region and region. So to doing it, we will account fixed effect to show this difficult. So now looking for the data, we get the socio-economic data from VHLSS with 9 weights of the survey. And the figure 1, I visualization the evolution of the income in Vietnam. And you see that thanks to the economic development, the income was a significant increase from nearly 3 million Vietnam dong to up to 100 million Vietnam dong. And also they have a slight decrease on 2008 due to the financial crisis. And this graph shows that most of the income come from wage income, and the agricultural income, which include crop income and other agricultural income, with very small share on the total household income. And when looking the data more carefully, we found that the inequality in income in Vietnam is rising. Figure 2 plot the difference between the 25 percentile income and 75 percentile income. So we can see that the graph is broader and broader to year by year. So it shows that it may show that the inequality is more common in Vietnam society. And for climate data, we get the climate data from Climate Prediction Center of the National Weather Service, and the figure 3 plot the distribution of temperature in Vietnam, and we can see that the median of the temperature is about 28 degree, and I also figure the dry and the wet day. And when looking the distribution of temperature by region in Vietnam, we see that each region have very different distribution of the weather. So so we should take to account the difference in the temperature between the each region in our specification. And then doing with econometric model, we follow the approach of the Nguyen and Truong in 2014, which the income per capita is a function of the current and private weather and control variable and household year and with region fixed effect. Our regression is within estimation because the household is comprised by itself, by year by year, 2 year by year by itself, and when they experience different types of weather. The standard error will be clustered in 2 dimensions, by year and by region. It allows us to control for spatial correlation across region and autocorrelation within the regions. So the relationship between income and weather could be summarized by this equation. In this equation, YIT is the log income per capita of the household I at time T, and temperature and precipitation will be shows the number of the day of the bin, which have the daily temperature and precipitation belong to the interval. We also include the control variable. The control variable in this figure 5 so the summary statistic of the control variable. There are 2 types of the control variable. The first type is the household characteristic. For example, the percentage of the working age person in the household, the percentage of the female, the proportion of the female in the household, the poor household. And the second type is the characteristic of the household head. For example, like the education of the household head or the age of the household head. We also include the fixed effect on the distribution to account for the observable and unobservable characteristic of the each household, each region that not vary over time. And so now we go to the result. First, surprisingly, we found that the effect of the temperature on total income is not clear. The result may be, it very depend on the outlier elimination methodology. I guess that is because of the distribution of the income, because there are a lot of the very rich people and very very rich people, so it will affect on the result, and so therefore the result will be sensitive with the way we delete the outlier, and therefore we conduct a further investigation on the source of the income, and we found that the effect of the workday is not significant on the group income. This result might reflect that the common group income are appropriate or are suitable to the weather, such as coffee, rice, corn, tea, or rubber. We found that the temperature at high levels seem to negatively impact on fruit income, including many kinds of the crucial export fruit in Vietnam, such as longan, lychee, jackfruit, or durian. And finally we found that the outcome from other agricultural income sources have very similar pattern with the food income. So this result require our attention, because the fruit sector is more increasing. It's important on Vietnam export blank. So therefore climate change will maybe harm from the export activity in Vietnam. And this figure 6 plot the visualization of the impact, and we can see that with high temperature, the impact will be more negative for food income and other agricultural income. Then we will assign the distribution effect of weather condition on household income by adding the interaction term between the mean of temperature at high degree with some demographic household variable like ethnic, poor household, or female head household. And we found the very striking result that being a poor household will be aggravate the relationship between high temperature and income. So the figure 7 shows this result. So it's showing that the more poor people will be damaged, will be have more loss on climate change than the rich people. So concluding, by using a methodology that use panel data to get unobservable and also characteristic, we can compute the marginal response of Vietnamese household income to the temperature, and our result provides the evidence that climate change would harm the household food income and other agricultural income. More specifically, the hot day will decrease the income by 1.1 to up to 2%. And we found that the poor households are more likely to be experience income loss than the rich households. So that are our finding for this session. So now we next to the effect on the individual, and I give the floor to. I will stop sharing.
Thanks, Yang. So now I would like to invite Dr. Patrick Hành Phân to present about effects on labor force and on terms and adaptation and perception. You're muting, Hành Phân.
Okay, can you hear me now? Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Can you see my screen too?
Yeah, but I can't see your camera.
Oh, come on. All right, thank you very much for introducing me. So my part today I will continue with the GM part on the households. Now my part is about the effect on the individual level. As you know that the temperature just may affect the worker in different way. So for example, it may affect directly by the physical and psychology discomfort for the worker, and they may possibly change their time allocation to work, and therefore they may reduce the task productivity. So by the altering the marginal return to an additional hour of labor supply, or can be the increasing the work effort exerted within that given hour. And there are showing the relationship between the change in climate, in temperature, on the labor productivity. So you can look at the Hill and Park in 2006 per et al. In 2015. So the literature already implies for us that the rising temperature may increase or decrease the labor productivity in this region. And then so that is the objective of this part. So we try to estimate how does the labor supply change with regarding to the climate change. And the first one, we used the Vietnamese labor force survey from 2009, 2018. So the methodology, we use the panel data with the Y variable is the log Y is the logarithm of the employee hourly wage and or our work per week. And then on the X variable, we got the C is the vector of climate variable. Would we use the annual temperature, or we can use the precipitation as well. And X is all the control variable. For example, like in individual characteristics like education, industry, something like that. And we also control the province and year fixed effects in the model as well. And here the result. So we can see that in the first two columns is the result for the how the temperature and the rainfall affect on the hour they work, and on the second on the last two columns is how the temperature and climate change affect on the wage. So you can look at it. So in the first two columns, so the temperature and the precipitations is when one is increased, so they will reduce the working hour. So for example, here, so they are reduced by the number of hours in around 0.5% in log, and then with the precipitation, so it will reduce the hour working by 2.5%. And then all the variable is also controlled. And you can see that the female is working less hour compared with the male as well. And in the column 2, we also interact the female with the temperature, which to see whether the temperature affect differently between male and female or not. And actually, we can see that it's significant, and the difference is about 0.2%. In terms of the wage, so you can see that the temperature itself affect the wage reduced by 11%. And again, in column 4, we can see we interacted the female with the temperature to see whether the temperature affect the wage between male and female. And we still see that the significant difference here. So the temperature affect seriously for female than male, and it's the difference around by 0.5%. And this sample we're using is we just focus on the working age for the 22 to 59 years old. So, and we also consider the effect of temperature and precipitation on the working hour or and the hourly wage for the elderly group, because as we all know that in the agriculture, that the elderly working in agriculture, the large proportion of them in that sector, so that we restrict the sample in for the elderly group only. And we can see that the temperature itself and the precipitation, we still got the same results, so it will affect even more than the younger age group. And the hourly wage, so the temperature affected, but not the precipitation, not the rainfall. So So going next, we are also trying to estimate the effect of the firm. So as you know that the high temperature may affect the input factor of the firm. So it can lower the ability of lubricant to reduce the surface friction of between the mechanical component, and then also increase the failure rate of the expanding volume of the input material. Or it can be lower the process of the speed of the computer, would affect the productivity later, and then they will reduce the labor supply. So the firm respond to the temperature by adjusting the capital input in so that they can make it more all the production is run smoothly. In the empirical specification, so we asking we try to estimate how does the labor demand. So in the previous part, we already looked at how labor supply change with regarding to the climate change. So now we look at labor demand change with when did the climate change happen. So we use the labor Vietnamese enterprise survey from 2009 to 2018. So we use the panel model, and then the log Y is the logarithm of the firm's outcome. So firm outcome in this situation, we use the revenue, we use the total factor for production and output and size. And this is the vector of climate variable. It's the same as above. It's like annual temperature, the average annual temperature, and the precipitation. And X is the control of the firm characteristic variable. And we also control for years and province effects. And here's the result. So you can see that when the temperature increase, so the firm's revenue will reduce by around 3%. And then the production also reduced by 3%, 3.5%. The outlook around 7%, and the firm side they so reduced by about 2%. The precipitation, so the precipitation may vary with the revenue. So you can see that it reduced is the same with the same pattern as the temperature, but with the production function. So you may see that it's an increment, but the argument here is depend on what kind of like industry that the firms are in, because some of the rainfall is good for the production, because especially in the agriculture sector, but within the manufacturing, it's also depend on the output, what type of output the firms for. And the locked output is negative, so you can see here is to reduce the output by 7.7%, and the firm size is quite high here, is around 19%. So we know that like the climate already harm to the labor market in both demand and supply curve, supply this side. But how we can cope with it, how we can adopt with the climate change. So that is the next section we are looking at. So we are looking at the adaptation and the perception from the individual. So the three areas that we are focused in this chapter is about the employment reallocation, migration, and also the personal perception towards the climate change. So climate adaptation is undertaken to avoid the damage or take advantage of opportunity posed by climate change. So at individual level, the worker may adjust their usual activity, or even they change the employment. For example, if the extreme weather or extreme rainfall happen in the agriculture, so they are more likely to move their employment, to move from agriculture into some kind of job indoor And then at the firm level, the firm may adjust the capital input to make the all the activities run better. So the objective is to try to estimate how does the employment reallocation at the individual level with regarding to the climate change. And we use the Vietnamese labor force survey. We use the multi-nominal logic because we got like three main industry that worker tend to be in. First one is agriculture, second one is industry, and the service. So we got three sectors. So we try to find whether the climate change will make the employment reallocation for the worker or not. And here is the result. So in this result, we can see that the temperature actually is reduce the agriculture, but we also consider here is not the linear relationship. We also consider the non-linear relationship in terms of temperature. So that's here we have the invert U shape, and for the agriculture, and for the industry we got the same, but for the service is the other way around. So you can see here we calculate the marginal effect. You can see, so take the average marginal effect from when the temperature from the 12 degree to 33 degree. You can see that the probability of the people in agriculture at the temperature 21 degree here, so they start reducing when the temperature exceeds the 21 degrees Celsius. And then similar for the industry, but the industry, so sorry, I think we put the picture here is for the industry, but we put the wrong picture of the age. Here should be the average temperature. So we got the similar pattern of the industry employment. And the last one is for the service employment. So the service employment, you can see that's the other way around. So when the temperatures over the 24 Celsius degrees, so the probability of people in service, they're increasing. So we can see that the flow moving from agriculture industry, they're moving up to the service sector. So in terms of migration, so human migration is the consequence of the climate variation, but the human migration is carried the last of the people usually think of when the climate change happens, because after they are trying to reallocate their work, so they were thinking of the migration, because so that's the really last option in Vietnamese case. So migration usually due to the temperature or rainfall variability, it's quite obvious, but it's just with the exception of the extreme weather only. But when the temperature, just the variation, just a little bit there, so it's still not really obvious. So in the literature, they're showing that for the paper Nguyen 2020, so they say that the negative income shock due to the high rainfall extreme, so encourage the migration to in rural area, and also the temporary migration is primarily caused by drought, where the flood event is introduced the permanent immigration. So the reason for migration is mainly due to the economic factor in Vietnam. So for example, like the poverty, for unemployment in that area, and then they also thinking of migration because of the personal development opportunity. People try to move from rural area to urban area for better in education, with the hope that they can earn higher income at the urban area. How about with the perception? So we think that the individual perception of climate change is quite crucial for any climate change or adaptation strategy, because when they got the a right perception, they will have the right strategy to cope with the climate change. So the objective is to understand how individual behavior and the perception with regarding to the climate change. So we use the work value survey in 2020. With that survey, we cannot use the panel because Vietnam only appeared in the wave 2020, and we use the linear probability model. So we use on the right hand side is the probability of the environment attitude, whether they got they think that the perception of the climate change, that they have a good attitude toward the climate change, or they completely indifferent with the climate change. And then on the right hand side, we got the temperature, and the X is the personal and the household characteristic to control for it. So here is the result. So the probability of individual attitude toward the environment protection. So, and we also consider the temperature and temperature square. So the nonlinear relationship between temperature and the environment protection attitude. And we didn't really see any significant level, significant in temperature in the model one. But however, we try to consider another way. So when with the extreme weather, so we are consider here is hot wave. So whether they experience the wave, the hot temperature in continuously in 5 days, and then when they really got a cold day in 5 consecutive days. And then we actually see that, so when they experience that, the cold wave, so their behavior, basically they increase the probability of people attitude toward the environment protection by 8%. So from that table, you can see that with the annual temperature change, we barely to see any personal attitude toward the environment protection. However, with the extreme weather, with the extreme cold weather, so it will help to increase the probability of individual toward the environment protection. So I think that's it for me. So thank you. So maybe we move to the next part.
Thank you so much, Dr. Phan Khánh Văn, to present very comprehensive pictures of the effects of climate change on labor force and on firms. So we can see clearly in the presentation that climate change has a negative impact on economic objectives from labor force, from labor individuals to firms. And the reason for why they decline is because firms suffer the negative impacts from climate change in both revenues and output. So that's quite important to note for policymakers, because we can see that the effects spread over on economic objective. So the question is that the estimation for the current data, for the past data that we have mostly in the periods from 2000 to 2018, 2018 for the household, and 2009 to 2018 for individual and firms. The reason for individual and firms from 2009 to 2018 that because of the limitation of the data. So now we will provide some projections under 4 popular scenarios by the end of the century. So I would like to invite Dr. Đỗ Xuân Hồng from Nông Lâm University, who has expertise in climate projection, to present about the projection of the labor markets of Vietnam under 4 different scenarios of climate change.
Thanks, Dr. Nguyen Truong Toan. You hearing me okay, right? Yeah. So thanks for your introduction. And this is basically in here, I think like it's very straightforward. The relationship between individual economic metrics with climate change have been detected through the past investigations. In here, we're trying to find out with increasing temperatures across Vietnam, what we will see in the future. And to have this result, we will need to have climate projection across different regions in Vietnam. And we have done that using originally the data climate projection from 31 models within the CIEM framework in terms of like, because the CIEM data set are very coarse. And we need to downscale it to have a final resolution to be usable for Vietnam investigation. And that's the reason why if you follow the GMS Vietnam webinar series, you will see that working group number 1 have described the downscaling technique very detailed in their 5th session. And basically it is a BCSD technique. We have a reference data set, and then we use that a tool to bias correct and downscale the coarse resolution data. And it is very important to note that in Vietnam, we also have another issue, is that Vietnam have heterogeneous climate. So in here, we decided to divide Vietnam into 7 different regions. We can see that in here we have 4 regions in the north and 3 regions in the south. And the notation is B1 to B4 for the north and N1 to N3 for the south. And basically that is how we assess the regional change of climate impact on different economic metrics in our assessment. As I mentioned, the assessment for the future scenario are very straightforward. We have different emission scenario, right? RCP 2.6 to RCP 8.5. And with each scenario, you will see that there is a rise in the temperatures according to the emission scenario. And we use the relationship between the economic with the rise in temperatures. And then we extrapolate. We can see that we extrapolate how the economic factor will change in the future. And figure 6 illustrates the result for one factor, which is the hourly wage. And in here, if you look on the figure on the right-hand side, the small panel at the bottom of the figure over here represent the average across Vietnam, and each smaller figure over here represent what we found for every single region. So B1 over here, B2 over here, and so on. And it is quite apparent that when you look into all of the small panels, it basically follow the patterns we found in the Vietnam average panel over here. So basically, for hourly wage, we will see that when temperature rise till the end of this 21st century, we will see a decline in national and regional scale across all RCP. And although they are quite similar, if we look closer, we will see that the magnitude of change in the northern part is relatively higher than the southern part over here. And that's what we found for one particular metric, which is the hourly wage. If we apply the same method to other assessed factors, but in here we list out 7 of them. hourly wage, hours work, gender pay gap, firm revenue, firm TFP, firm output, and firm size. And you will see that we see the impact of climate change over on assessed factors, and the magnitude of change absolutely is highest for the high emission scenario RCP 8.5. So essentially, if we emit more greenhouse gas in the atmosphere at the end of the century in 21st hundreds, you will see a substantial change in all of the factor over here. For example, hourly wage, you will see that a decline of about 40% relative to the historical period. And some other very important result is that for firm revenue, for example, we will see around 13% of reductions, and firm output also reduced about 26% relative to the historical period. And it indicates that climate change is something we need to consider when thinking about a future policy for Vietnam. And I think like Dr. Thi Thu Hoai will continue with this one, but maybe Toan will have some comment on this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Do Xuân Học, for very rigorous projections, so that we can see some pictures of the effects of climate change by the end of the centuries. Of course, there's some thing need to do with adaptation, but with the fourth scenario, at least we can see some figures about the impacts of climate change by the end of this century. And as researchers, we provide the evidence, we provide the facts, but then I would like to invite the policy experts, Dr. Thi Thu Hoai from Centers of Institute Economics Management, to provide some policy implications from the findings.
Yes, thank you very much, Toan, and good afternoon from Hanoi. We have just listened to that the result from various models and the work we have been done in this chapter, and we can see that is very rich information about the impacts of the climate change on the different aspects of the household welfare, from the household level to individual levels, to from the supply, labor demand and supply, and also from the employment and gender. And this is a rich information that and finding that in my presentation, I try to draw some policy implication for Vietnam. And I present here that I see the 6 aspects of the policy that we can draw from this finding. The firstly is on the climate change impact assessment that I will present in detail later. And the second one is the policy implication on the agricultural development and structure chain in Vietnam. The third aspect is on the poverty reduction policy. The fourth one will be on the employment. The next one on the gender issue, and the last one on the implementation, more on the implementation in response to the climate change. That's a role a different player. So firstly, relating to the impact assessment. So you already know that Vietnam has just recently issued the revised environmental protection law. And in that one, given the increasing impacts of the climate change, the government already stressed the issue of climate change in that law. And in particular, in order to have a good and sound policy response to climate change, we take seriously into account the impact assessment of climate change. So this will be done in Vietnam more intensively in the incoming time. And throughout this chapter and this exercise that the work we have in present now, we can see this is a very good example of the impact assessment of climate change, in particular on the household welfare, as I mentioned before. So for this one, we for the finding from this work, I think that several aspects we need to pay attention to when we look at the impact of climate change on particular on the household. For example, the job creation, the issues of employment allocation, the issue of economic restructuring, that's a transformation from agriculture to industry and service sector, and also the restructuring the agricultural sector as well. And also on the, of course, on the household income. And in particular here, in this work, we can see very clearly the impacts on the business. So this issue, I think, is need to be taken into account when we do the impact assessment on climate change. And the work here, the finding also so the particular attention should be paid to the some very vulnerable groups, that is the poor and the woman. We found the clear evidence on the negative impact on the poor, as well as on the woman. So this two group need to pay more attention to when we look at the impact assessment of the climate change. The second area that we may need to look at in terms of policy, based on the finding, is that the consider the issues of climate change in economic restructuring. As you already see, the impacts on, and also Thi Anh also mentioned during his presentation, that the impacts, negative impacts on the fruit crop, fruits sector, and so as well as the magnitude of the impact is quite concerning. So this need to pay more attention, because you know Vietnam is now transforming to more to the higher productivity subsector in agriculture. So fruit and also livestock is two of the sectors that we try to move on and to restructuring too. But from the finding of this work, we need to find a way to reduce the negative impacts, or maybe we apply the good technology and in order to avoid, or in order to reduce the negative impacts from the weather change, from the climate change. So this is this is what we need to take into account when we see the issue of climate change on the economic restructuring in Vietnam. And the third point I would like to share here is that the issue of the policy on the poverty reduction. As you already know, that clearly the finding is that the negative impact on the poor from the climate change. The policy in Vietnam, we can see that in the national budget program on the poverty reduction, we have quite many, the government developed quite many policy in order to reduce the poverty in Vietnam. But I can see that the aspect of the climate change, although it already took into account, but not very in depth. So I think this issue should, from the finding of this work, we think that it need to do more, to take more seriously the issue of climate change on the poverty in Vietnam, and vice versa, because in Vietnam we also in parallel with the national touches program on poverty reduction, we also have a national programs, not touches, but national program on the climate change adaptation. So the issue of poverty reduction as well also need to be taken into account in these programs. And one of the possibility is that to suggestion is to develop the livelihood model in order for the poor household to respond to climate change. So this will based on the certain context, different local in Vietnam and different types of aspect on the household, and that in order to design the good model to apply in the certain context. So the fourth one, policy implication I would like to suggest here is that the issue of climate change in the employment, that in some others study they also mentioned about this, and we also have a policy to respond to this one, for example, to support the transition of the job from the more vulnerable job to climate change to the more sustainable job for the people. But in this one, as I mentioned before, that is not only from the supply side, labor supply side, but also from the demand side, that we can see here clearly the negative impact on the business. And with the impact on business, they will reduce employment, and that will affect the people, affect the household, the individual. So from this the finding of this chapter, we see that the policy need to take into account the impacts of climate change on the business, that we may need to have some support, the policy support, in order to mitigate the negative impact of climate change on business and on firms. And the next one, we also see very clearly from the finding is that the gender issue, that the female workers work harder and learn as when the temperature increase. So this also implies that the climate change can have a negative impact on gender inequality. But in terms of the policy in Vietnam do quite well in terms of the gender policy. And we mainstream quite many, the gender issue in quite many aspects, policy aspects, including the climate change. So, but from this finding, we can see the evidence, more evidence for this policy that had been carrying now in Vietnam. For example, to improve the capacity of women in response to climate change. We already have that kind of program in Vietnam. But in this paper, I would like to shed more on this issue, and maybe we do more that to may consider to promote some kind of typical model which suitable for the woman in response to climate change. And the last point I would like to draw here is that as you already see that we see the multiple impact from the multiple dimension, various dimension, and to to impact on various entity. So in order to respond or in order to mitigate the negative impacts and also to adapt to the climate change, we need a lot of intervention. And for this one, we think that the role of NGO will help for together with the policy from the governments in order to help the household, the grassroots level, the individual, to cope with the impacts, the negative impact, and also to respond, adapt to the climate change. So with this point, we suggest the more stronger mobilize stronger the participation of the NGO to reduce the negative impacts of the climate change, as well as to strengthen the capacity of the household, of the individual, and also firms to adapt to climate change and to be more resilient. So that is some of the policy implication I would like to stress based on the finding of this chapter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hoai, for very insightful comments and policy implication from the findings of the chapter. And we have two reviewers, one from the research background and one from the policy side. I would like to invite Associate Professor Giang Thanh Long from National Economics University, who has extensive experience in social economics research and applied econometric research in Vietnam, to provide a comment on the chapter.
Okay. Thank you, Toan, and also thank you, GEM project, for inviting me. This is the third time for me to join your seminar, so it's my honor to read chapter 6 and make some comment. Let me see, show my slide. Can you see now? Okay, so general comment, I think this is very comprehensive and good report about the impact of climate change on individuals, household, and firm, along with adaptation and perception, as well as projection for the impact in the very long time horizon. I enjoy reading very much because it also quite familiar with my knowledge. The author used different sets of data along with different economic model, and I think that the key finding, as Dr. Hoai just mentioned, could provide appropriate answer to research question, and also provide more some policy implication for Vietnam, not only now but also in the long term. And because of time limited, so I just focus on what I think that the chapter can improve the findings. The first one, the effect on household. In this case, Phan Anh already mentioned that they use OLS technique to estimate the impact on the income per capita of the household, using VHLS 2002 until 2018 data. One of the key issues that I am concerned, not only in this research, but also many others, that we use the income per capita of the household. Usually we use this one by dividing the total household income, or some special income like agriculture-based income or non-agriculture income by total household member. And this depends heavily on the household structure and occupation of household member. For instance, last year, Dr. Nguyễn Việt Cường, very well, and I also work on the VHLS, and we see that the impact of, for instance, COVID on the household of people headed by younger people and also older people quite differently. And because they are different in terms of size, age structure, and occupational, and then the income per capita is really significantly different. So I think that this is also one thing we need to take into account for the estimation. The second one, the effect on individual. In this case, you use the labor force survey during 2009 until 2018, and you want to see, the effect of temperature and also precipitation on working hour and hourly wage at a provincial level, and you already control, the provincial effect. I think that maybe because of limited in the space, so statistical description of variable did not provided, were not provided in the paper very clearly, and especially the distribution of working hour and work hour wage by various socio-economic and demographic characteristic worker. For sure that people from urban different from rural, from people like a blue color different from the white color, for instance. And especially when we talk about the working hour and hourly wage, we can see they are substantially different between the worker in different sector. For instance, people working in weather hazardous job are strongly affected very clearly, while those working in other job like officer or manufacturer in the huge enterprise may not be affected because they have better working environment. So I think that's also important one. About the gender differences, this is also interesting when you get the interaction factor for the estimation between the female and also temperature. But I think that in the labor force survey, men and women really different in terms of place of the resident and also job related variable. For instance, like job position or contract type, and therefore you need maybe to explore further these variable because they are available in labor force survey. In table 6.3 in page 284 of the book, related to the effect on the individual, you can see that the sample only used for those age 22 to 59, but you may know that for people age 60 and over, about 45% of them still working, especially for people age 60 to 64. The rate of working still about more than 55%. Unfortunately, most of them working as vulnerable worker defined by ILO. It means they are working as self-employed or unpaid family worker, as well as agriculture related work. Even Vân already mentioned about the estimation for people age 60 plus, but I think that maybe the majority of people age 60 and over working as vulnerable worker, so it a bit missing in the data set when we talk about the impact of climate change. And I think that if we take into account this situation, maybe we can provide more social protection policy recommendation to income security as well as labor protection for the aged worker. The third one is about the impact on the firm. In this case, the first one, we also need to get some more statistical description for variable in the estimation. I'm not sure about the reason why it is lack of description, because sometimes for the reader we need to understand further about the variable, and also definition and measurement should be provided also. For instance, how the total factor productivity was defined, and how the size of the firm defined. Maybe in this case I guess it's defined by the number of workers. And I think that the indicator that in consideration in the model, it is they are revenue, TFP, output, and size, dependent on various market and policy issue. For instance, economic sector manufacturing very different from agriculture and services, and investment policy resulting from different sides of the firm in both revenue and profit or number of workers. And therefore, we need to consider this variable also in the estimation. For the impact on the behavior, I think that the first one, the seasonal differences should be considered in the analysis, particularly various places where agricultural production has been reduced due to industrialization and urbanization, and people tend to migrate to other places for longer duration between agricultural season. So I think maybe this one should be considered. The second one maybe not in the data set, but I think it's interesting and also impact significantly on the behavior of the people. That is job creation capacity by local government through investment or tax policy, because sometimes because of the capacity, limited capacity in creating job, some vast area like in the center, people usually migrate to the south or a part to the north, to work in the industrialized provinces, and they make their home like deserted. And I think that sometimes even like for the central part of the country, the climate change also impact seriously, and therefore people could not find a job that satisfy for their life. And I think that maybe possible dummy variables should be considered for the estimation. The last one is about projection. I think that that is quite interesting to see the result for 2025, 2050, 2075, and also 2100. However, I personally think that the projection period is really long. Actually, I'm working on the demographic projection, and sometimes I work with UN expert, and they also made projection for population in Vietnam and also other countries in the world to 2100. But I think that along with the very long projection, we face a number of uncertainty. For instance, population in Vietnam is now aging, but then we will be aged very soon by 2036, and therefore we will have very rapidly aged labor force. And then maybe we can change the economy towards a less labor intensive industry or IT based industry, cleaner industry, for instance. So how this factor taken into account in the projection. And I personally think that probabilistic projection, sometimes maybe we call like a stochastic projection, maybe consider rather than scenario-based one that we have now in the chapter. Okay, that's my comments. And again, I really appreciate the result of this chapter. And thank you for inviting me to review and also join this interesting seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Anh Long, for very insightful comments on the methods and the context and zero approach of the chapters. So now I would like to invite Dr. Hồ Công Hòa from Central Sub-Institute Economics Management to comment on the policy recommendations.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me and see my screens?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Yes, first of all, I would like to thank for all of you invite me to participate in the workshop and share some information from my research period. I'm not discuss detail for the reports, but I discuss for the finding and policy implication based on the finding. Yes, first, I would like to thank for share with us the result. It's a very comprehensive and good report. And the research in the impact of climate change on social issue, social economic issue is very, very difficult. Why? Because it depends on the data, but the witness in Vietnam themselves depend on many factors, not clearly the impact from climate change, but depend on the another factor. I will show you with the research team effort, many findings on the effect of climate change have been detected. Negative impacts of climate change on household and agriculture, employment, firm, and poor people, as well as suggest the policy implication. And given the evidence and answers for the period study, which not answer themselves, for me, for my research in periods, we cannot answer, but this report answer for me. Yes, very, very excited. Sorry. Yes, climate change, it's its impact to the people, to especially for the poor people, and that migration as an adaptation solution to climate change. Yes, that's true, but climate change is not one of the factors. It's not only the picture here. You can see the factor, the driver of migration. So many factors due to the first of all environment, economy. Yes, I think economic driver is the biggest reason. That the picture with so many factors. Here you can see the for the policy. So sorry, okay. For the recommendation of the policy implication, first, impact assessment of climate change should be carefully examined. Yes, we can see here, draw and salinization and restructuring of economy. For example, in Mekong Delta, the decrease, that reduce of planet area of paddy and versus with increasing the out migration rate. You can see here that indicator evidence for the finding in the report. I saw that, and then I share with you the number, the chaine here, This is the migration rate. Next migration, sorry, I missed it. Next migration. Also, sorry, that is the immigrant rates and our migrate compare with the planet area of paddy. You can see. And here, the correlation between the planet area of paddy and cereal and our migration rate are not at the same at all at the region and the nationwide. As you can see here, it's different. In the Mekong Delta, we can see the trend, the minus as the negative correlation between the planet area paddy and our migration rate. But in the wider, in the countryside, so in the country level, it's different. Yet we should be careful to have the policy. And here we can see the net migration rates in region by region. In the economy, developed region, for example, in South region, just the net migration is positive because the immigration rate is more than our migration rate. But in other regions like Mekong Delta in the region center, and you can see here, just different that we can say that the economic development is the economy condition is the biggest factor to the migrant. Of course, climate change affects for the economy, like this finding of the team research. Yes, of course, that's why economic impact of climate change on economy. Here, as you can see, we consider the issue of climate change in economic restructure and care about the labor supply and demand. You can see the correlation between the GDP contraction of industry and construction services compared with the labor contractor, labor chapter of agriculture sector. That's a negative correlation. But the slope is different between the industrial construction sector compared with services sector. You can see here, the different. Why? Because the labor from agriculture moved to the industry and construction, yet it's low skill. But the services, we need a high skill. We had to be trained to work for the services. That's why the slope is more than in the services sector. Yes. And here I would like to share with you the structure of economy due to the migration. Here we compare the Bắc Ninh and Nghệ An province. The construction, the structure of economy is here. Bắc Ninh industry and construction, it's big, but agriculture it's fewer from when we have Samsung and Canon group invest here. We must change the share of we must change the economic structure. That's why in Bắc Ninh, the net migration rate is positive and increasing. But in Nghệ An, that's different. That the share of agriculture share of agriculture is big. It's not, we can see different with Bắc Ninh and Nghệ An. In Bắc Ninh, in migration rates, it's more than our migration because the structure of economy must share of industry and construction. But in Nghệ An, yes, it's our immigrant rates is more than in migration rate. And here we should pay more attention to climate change on poor poverty reduction. That's why we can see here the correlation between the income and net migration rate. That positive correlation you can see here. The more invest as the more net migration rates, the more income here. That's why the people move from the poor area to the developed area, the rich area. And when they move, we should have the policy here. The people, the worker, possible in Bagni, we survey there. For a commune with 11,000 people live here, local people, but more than 20 labor from more than 20,000 people from other province come here. So that pressure for the infrastructure and public services here. Yes, we should take care about that. And the report answer for us, for me, why the gap between the gap income between the man and the woman in migration, man and woman migration here, and by age. I could not answer for this question, but for this report, answer for me. That is good finding. Here you can see the difference, the gap income, but we can see that although the income gap between the female migrant and the male migrant had been narrow, is still quite large. But basically, in order for female migrant to earn from same income as male migrant, they had to reduce longer work hour. Yeah, for this, I answer for my previous research. But this report, you give me the evidence why. And here we can see the income for the migrant between the female and the male migrant, that different by reason. Yes, that is my discussion that I would like to share with you the evidence and would like to thank for this research. Answer for me, I didn't answer for the period research. Again, I thank you for all your listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen Toan, for very rigorous slides, explanation, and provide additional comments and suggestions for the slide. We are running out of time, to be honest. I will send you the feedback later to the discussions. We have one question, and I think that belongs to Dr. Thi Thu Hoai. I would like to invite Dr. Thi Thu Hoai to answer that.
Yes, thank you very much for the question, Perry. That's you ask about the mechanism policy to assist person respond to the climate shocks in agriculture. The short answer is yes, there is a mechanism and policy for that. The reason is that you know, Vietnam is one of the most vulnerable country to the climate change, and we suffer a lot climate shocks, a lot of storm and floods all the year. So That's why it's also affect a lot of the people, in particular in agriculture. So the government already have set up the policy to assist people, to support people, to release these negative impacts. And but there are, I think, also the problem need to be improved more on this mechanism. Firstly, it's about the content of the policy as well, how to evaluate the loss and how to what is the administration process in order to apply for that the support. That is a problem. And also another issue the government also try to develop is to insurance for the agriculture. So this policy is also have a pilot and is developing now, but it need to be improved in the future. That is my answer to the question.
Thank you, Thi Hoai. So now I will give the floor to Etienne to conclude the seminar today. Can't hear you, Etienne. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So thank you very much, Toan, and thank you all for these very lively discussions. So this webinar basically closes a sequence where we try to deal with different types of sectoral impacts of climate change and their relevant adaptation strategies. So we will have a few weeks of rest on the J'aime Vietnam webinar series, but we come back already on May 11th for the last sequence. And in this last sequence, we will try to deal mostly with the macroeconomic aspects of climate impacts and adaptation. So there will be 4 last webinars starting from May 11th and every week after that for four final weeks. So we will be very happy to welcome you again and keep the discussion running on the more macroeconomic side of climate impacts and climate policies. So thank you very much and see you all very soon in May. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you and bye-bye.